Thank you, CNBC, for having me here. Good evening, friends. Speaking late on an event like this has a lot of hazards. And particularly if I missed half the forecast and half the discussion. But it's an exciting moment. And when I think about CNBC, I think there's such a great relationship between what you have done, what you have gone through, and I think what lies ahead. Firstly, I must congratulate you that I think in the last 15 years, there were a lot of people who tried to get into your position. You did not let that happen. You continued to rule, and that's a fantastic achievement. We've seen a lot of up and down in these 15 years, and now we seem to be on a period of up, and whether that is possible. And obviously, I think we heard very interesting views on different aspects of the market. But my thoughts are not into forecasting, really, as much as a consciousness that what got us here will not take us there. And clearly that has been the story. And let me just recap some of the last 15 years, that how complex the world is, and if anything, it is getting more complex. That in 2007 or 2006, we thought US is going to rule the world forever. And everything US was probably the best exportable commodity, and 2 years later, US became a villain. Somebody from the floor reminded us about Russia. Only 3 years ago, we had this great investor talking about a commodity boom, that how China, India, etc. are going to consume endless amount of commodities, and you're going to have a commodity bull market of a crazy proportion. And there were people grabbing all kinds of assets. And now we are talking about who will buy coal and who will buy commodities and so on. So I find it's really very, very complex. And so on currencies and so on, that from worrying about a 50 yen to a dollar, today we are looking at 120 yen, and maybe that's not enough. For me, it's always been the story of enterprise. As an investor, what you really look at first is the man behind the enterprise rather than any of the numbers and complexity and the ratios and so on. And therefore, my mind is a lot more on what enables long periods of growth, long periods of change, and therefore I'm thinking of people who could see these things, or who could lay foundation for great sustainable change in societies and countries in the world. So obviously we're not talking about the next 15 months as to what needs to get done, and we kind of all assume that whatever is the known agenda in terms of whether GST and stuff like that will get done. But really, in my role now in post-active investment banking, spend my time in areas where I did not spend time earlier, and these are very interesting areas. Is there an alignment between the underlying thought in this room and in the corridors of power? Which is that we have a leader who is an extraordinarily popular leader, not only in this country, but increasingly around the world. In my career, I haven't met a political leader who is so imbued with the thought that he was born probably to bring about a change and achieve this. So he's looking at this more as a task for which he was born than really being in power or using that power. And of course, the opportunity that in a world which is full of dollars and nowhere to go, India is a destination, and oil and commodities, as we talked about, and India is a destination again. And how do we benefit from this? We talked about a concept called tiger economies. We don't hear that expression very commonly now, but a few years ago it was very popular when we talked about Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, etc. And Taiwan was, I think, the fourth one. Can we be a tiger economy? Can we really grow at 7%, 8% over a long period of time is a question. And given the limitations of my mind, which is overwhelmed by the complexity of the world, particularly if you are forecasting long periods of time, I am inclined to think of three things. 3 Ds popularized by Modi ji, that demand, demographics, and democracy. To me, a powerful democracy and a more skilled demographics, I think makes the biggest difference. And therefore, I'm going to talk about a few themes, and which may seem very different, very soft, very undramatic compared to the dynamics that I saw partly here. We need an economy whose character is very different from the one we are used to. We went from large government companies, licensed companies, to large enterprises. Can we have an economy driven by startups? We are celebrating this event today. 15 years ago, this was a startup with Mr. Raghav Behel and other promoters joining. And what a difference you have made. As a matter of fact, if I look back on 40 odd years of my career, I think every single change was brought about what was called a startup, a new guy. In the late 70s, it was Dhirubhai Ambani who challenged things. And then we had Infosys, and we had Sun Pharma, and we had Anil Agarwal, and we had Sunil Bharti Mittal, and we had a Kishore Biani, and so on. And now, of course, we have Flipkarts and Snapdeals and others. I think it is very, very important that we understand the value of this, not only from just ease of doing business, but what they bring to the table. We all lament that, we probably lost last 10 years, or maybe in some manner last 50, 60 years. Who makes up such lost time? It is the startup mind who says, oh, I want to grow 10 years in 1 year. And if we have to grow 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we need culture of that kind. I think when I look at India, I find only that category which thinks transformationally, which thinks possibilities, which thinks accountability, which thinks high risk, and so on. And most importantly to me, it is this segment which has the greatest proclivity, greatest willingness to give back. And we need a lot of it, and I'm going to talk a little about it. More reasons for this is that from a country which has not had a great investing culture, we need to create that culture. And this whole angel investing culture. I mean, if we, as a country, if I look at the demographics and our character, we are closest to America, where this has thrived, and it has not happened here. And how do we make that happen? And even more importantly, most of these companies are likely to be in the services sector, and we need a lot of employment. So the nature of our enterprise, sometimes, we get obsessed with large billion-dollar bets in refineries and infrastructure and so on. We can't forget the employment challenge. And what is my fear, and what do I see around me, is that at one level, Modi ji has said that we need to go to a rank of at least 50 in starting up business and doing business in India from, I think, an unmentionable number. What is actually happening on the ground has a lot to desire. Maybe some people in this room are aware, but I'm sure that majority of the people are not aware that most of our startups are not registered in India. Not only they are financed by foreign VCs, which means all the capital formation is going to go abroad, they are not even registered in India. And one point of time, they will not be known as Indian companies, they will be known as Singaporean. Singapore is a popular destination. A small company like Flipkart was levied with a tax notice of something like 1,400 crores. And I can go on that recently, we've been angel investing for 20, 30 years, and my accountant was telling me that we have got a notice from an income tax department. And I'm not talking about personal things, I'm talking really generically, but this is just as an example, that we received a notice that, oh, you are not a classified angel investor, but please explain, why did you invest in this company? So instead of promoting a culture of the kind that we are wanting, we have a completely different culture. Yet another company which is trying to bring about a transformation in rural India, probably having the top technology, constantly has been telling me that we find this a problem, that we have the defining technology which can bring about change, but we are a startup, so we have losses on our balance sheet and we will be disqualified. Even if we define the technology, we will still not be qualified, and someone's second quality, third quality, etc. will probably do it. And one telling point in the last point is that I think this time I missed the ET awards, but I think one of the previous awards, Bansal of Flipkart was there. And he made the best speech that evening. And he said, I have an appeal to make, because most of the people in the audience were balding like me and graying. He said, most of you are parents. Please allow your children to go into startups. He said, we have had enormous amount of difficulty fighting our parents that, look, I don't want to take up a job, I want to do something new and novel. Will you please? It was such a wonderful, moving appeal. Let me turn a little to beyond the nature of economy, that how it has to be startup driven. And I think this audience is too knowledgeable for me to recount that how it is a startup, whether it was Microsoft taking on IBM and the Google and the Apple and so on, that how they have been able to bring about a change. Second is, of course, governance. And while we talk of changes in governance, definitely, and Modi ji has again given a great slogan in terms of, small government and big on governance. Unless we make a drastic, dramatic change in our governance model, slow change is no change at all. And over the last 6-7 months, this government has made some fantastic moves, and I'm sure it will continue to do so. Shireen, I think we had a discussion on this theme a few months back in New York. But I think we need, the opportunity is so large, we have lagged behind so much, that I would like to put 3 themes. Is governance by deadline, governance online, and governance where national interest defines interest of mine. And based on my experience and based on some of the experience of people who have been involved in such matters for a much longer period of time, is that it is, I can't even tell you that how frustrating it is that in the affairs of the government, the convention, the rule, what happened last time, etc. are so big that the greatest of leaders finds it difficult to bring about a change. And who will bring about this change is really a big question. That I'm sure that a leader in a hurry wants to do all of that. But unless we as voters are going to demand certain things, I don't know how this will happen. But I do clearly see that only 2 years ago, or maybe even a year ago, we all saw that how large Indian businessmen were not wanting to invest 1 rupee in India. Hard businesses had started to go away. The fear is that we can miss the next wave also. So while we are in the honeymoon period, while the intent is fantastic, while the start has been fantastic, we need to be vigilant to push the envelope, push the benchmark higher and higher. I had an interesting discussion today morning, and we were interpreting, this was relating to some of the things that are being attempted, and where we had a situation like a particular section doesn't, something else applies. And we had a request from a very, very senior bureaucrat to say, can someone certify that it's like saying that dog is not a cat? I'm not going to say it, let someone else say it. So the degree of challenge we can't even imagine. We talked about currencies and rates, and someone rightly said that, the energy crisis is currently a matter of smiles for us, but it can soon be a crisis because some of the countries can go down under, and it is really complex. how do we ensure that we are independent? How do we ensure our appeal that we will get all the dollars that we need? We have had several years of missed targets on PSU divestment because the markets were not doing well. And unless we think out of the box, I think we can again miss it. Because this time we don't require $5–10 billion, we require probably $30–40–50 billion if we have to look at this kind of growth rate. So we have had this situation in the past and we missed it, and we need completely out of box thinking on this. And if we are imaginative, because I remember that in the 90s we did not imagine that we could get thousands of crores from selling spectrum. Or even PSU divestment could be as large as it proved to be in some of the years at least. Currently, government is bouncing off of an idea where a very novel kind of divestment which can mobilize thousands of crores for the government is being attempted, so I think some work is being done. I was discussing with one of my colleagues and he said the Railway Finance Corporation issues the most popular bonds in the country. It was very interesting to see. And I said, why? He said, because railways have large visible cash flows, they have large number of assets, and they are so empowered by the government and by the country that they have the least amount of bottlenecks in growth and expansion. And it's wonderful to see that someone like Mr. Suresh Prabhu is there. But the amount of money raised by railways is a pittance. And when I looked into it, it's one of the most unimaginative parts done in a most unimaginative manner. Similarly, we have ports, we can't talk of defense. I think if we do not think, if we are not able to achieve raising resources of the order of $50 billion to $100 billion in the next 3, 4, 5 years, I think we'll miss the boat again. But my belief is, I think it is possible. One other perspective is, and I was discussing with Manish on this point, that if one were to look at the totality, and this is, Manish triggered this thought really, is that I think the total funds management industry in the world, and I hope I'm not wrong, is somewhere from $15 to $17 trillion. The sovereign funds are probably $5–6 trillion out of that. The alternative opportunity for sovereign funds is probably investing in their own bonds or the US bonds, which is 2%, 3% at best. Can we, if we are the great country of future, can we create something where we are an alternative for that, and then we can get 10, 20, 30, $40 billion very easily from these countries? As we become geopolitically a lot more stronger, I think a possibility exists. I think when Japan and all are wanting to come and invest in our corridors, industrial corridor and the rail corridors and all, I think big things can happen. But as a banker, I know that only those people who have an image, self-image, who can talk confidently can raise money. I think as a country, we are very, very poor at it. We have a very poor self-image. We get ecstatic, we get euphoric, but we are not consistently confident. We have short-sold ourselves number of times because we get nervous so fast, we eat out of wrong hands all the time. And can we build a self-image on what we have achieved in Aadhaar, what we have achieved in the mission to Mars, what number of our enterprises have achieved, where from IT to spirit, the Kumbh Mela that I think it is small things. It's not that any country that is really projecting a great powerful image is always based on being 100% right. I think it's time that we change this image. Obviously, when I ran my company or when I advised many others, I said that important thing in life is not only to grow the fastest and be the most beautiful, but is not to make a mistake. I think even if we made no serious mistake, I think some of this will be possible. I also think that, what countries we bracket ourselves in, or we allow ourselves to be bracketed in, is important. And when we look at some of the league tables, they are not really comparable. The land mass ratios that we have, the history, the culture, the democracy that we have, and to be clubbed with smaller companies, etc., countries, is probably misleading. Can we do PR? Can we do a PR in our own mind first, as someone beautifully said that, to progress first you have to get rid of the museums in your mind. Can we get rid of the museums in our mind to create this self-image where I think there are only two countries that matter to us. One is China, because their growth is more current, and Japan, because characteristically we are a lot more closer to Japan. They're a democracy, they're a cultured country, they're an old culture country, unlike America, which doesn't have great history of culture. And some of these things may seem very soft and distant, but I know how these shape our minds. I had a very interesting experience some time back. The top management of one of the largest investors in India wanted to spend some time with me. And I was trying to tell them things that were not popular. Research reports talk of many things. And so I chose to talk a little about the 2% CSR responsibility, disliked by most corporates, but it fascinates me. And I am very excited about it, and I talked about it. And they wanted to have a lengthy discussion on it, so I think given within the time allocated, we did discuss about it. And both they and I saw something that can undo the world, and that has undone the world, is that in capitalistic democracies, what has been going on in the name of welfare? And here was an opportunity. To my mind, I said, when I pay 1 rupee tax, the productivity of that 1 rupee is probably 15 paisa, 20 paisa or lower by some standards. Whereas if I take the responsibility of spending that 1 rupee compared to what is happening, probably I'll get a productivity of 5 rupees. So it can make a 25 to 50 time difference. And I have attended some of the fora of businessmen who are now wanting to get seriously into CSR. You're seeing this kind of effect. I mean, some of you may have attended the Innovation Awards by Marico. And Harsh was telling me that how little he has spent on the whole initiative, but what is the kind of impact he's making in terms of employment, productivity, revenue generation, and so on. And I have many, many examples to go by. I also would like to, bring into focus the kind of work that has been done by some of our businessmen. That we have all heard about the polio eradication from this country. But the main force behind this were two corporates. It was Cyrus Poonawalla of Serum Institute of India who provided the vaccine. It was a Birla organization. They took on the main anchor role in providing. Obviously, the government was a partner in it. And so I think this whole 2% CSR can be an extraordinary dimension for the whole world. So I would wish that 2% go to 5%, and somewhere we start pushing the tax rate and altering the whole society. So it's not only about CSR, but also the fact that we start looking at it in the correct manner. And I do want to share something which one of the greatest change agents, Muhammad Yunus, said. And it is very poignant line and unlikely lines at an event like this, but I will say my heart. He says, we use charity to avoid recognizing a problem and finding a solution. He said, we use charity as a way to shrug off our responsibility. So if you look at the whole thing, that what actually was society's responsibility, we allowed to get or let into government responsibility. And obviously in a democracy, you can win votes. So we have seen what all has happened. And this may seem esoteric, but I've found the best people, like Ramesh Ramanathan at Janalakshmi, Ramji Raghavan, Zarina and Ronnie Screwvala giving up their business to focus on this, or an Ashish Dhawan. So this trend, which may seem very small and distant, I think is central to our future. And I think a lot is happening, so one feels very happy with it. And lastly, let me just look at CNBC programming. That besides your market coverage, what percentage of your programming is non-market? You have a program which is Young Turks, and you have a large number of programs which are not about now and here, which are about really the change in society, about the social initiatives and all. So I see that it is too complex for anyone to forecast what will happen over 15 years or what are the winning strategies. But when we talk of empowering ourselves, when we talk of our own self-image, when we talk of improving our own governance, when we talk of encouraging our youth in terms of startups and otherwise, I think that's a more surer bet. I, for one, have never been an active market man. I've been a very keen investor. And for me, like Vivekanand, when we see gross things, we think the causes that cause the change are gross too, but it's always the fine things that matter. They are the ones which have the real force. So I've tried to, in the short period that I was allocated, I tried to look at 3-4 issues that we need to pay attention to in a overt manner or in an appropriate manner for this to happen. I, for one, do believe that we are in for great times, and my great times are linked to the nature of leadership, the nature of people who are wanting to engage with the country in a different manner, and I mentioned some names, in the way the Prime Minister is trying to engage the average citizen. Some of these initiatives will become very successful, some of them will become probably not as successful. But one initiative that has really caught the imagination of the society is the one that relates to rural sanitation. And it may be all right to mention names that some of the best names in the country are engaged with this, and the amount of money that is being offered to solve this problem. So I think for market men, benefiting from the country is a big thing. And but I think it's also time to engage with the country. CNBC has done a great job in it. I wish you all the very best for many, many years to come. And here is an appeal to all my friends here in the room and all my countrymen that unless we engage with our country, unless we make it our responsibility, good times can slip away very easily. Life is not that simple and that easy. Thank you very much for letting me.
Mr. Bhansali, thank you so much for that. It was truly inspiring. But you know, at CNBC TV18, we love quizzing everyone who comes. So let me have Pencil back on stage to quiz you a little bit.
Thank you very much for the very kind words you said about CNBC and the company. As I was telling others before you came in, you've been part of our journey, and you've proved a great inspiration to us. The speech that you just made, what we need to do to get to achieve the potential. The underlying theme is that we may not, it's not all a path that's easy to tread. We could easily undersell ourselves. I want to ask you to put on that investment banking hat of yours, the merchant banker that you were. You told us that it's the people behind the business that you look for. So clearly, Mr. Narayan Murthy and Nandan, all of them struck a chord in you. You're clearly inspired by the current Prime Minister. If you were to take India public, what is the premium? You also said we always undersell ourselves. So what is the premium you would ask India to seek from the world?
So when you take companies public, you have to also time yourself.
Okay.
And so I will raise alternative resources till I am able to really create an image which may be 15 to 18 months out.
Okay.
It is too early. I think we are disengaging from the past. Some of the problems have to be solved, and so real action, I think, can begin only, say, another 12 months or so. And once that happens, I think I would ask for a very high P.
What P would you ask for India when it goes out? Because you said we need to raise about $50 to $100 billion.
That's think of P, and Rakesh is not here, but I think we're talking for an interest rate as a reciprocal number for P, anywhere from probably in the range of 20.
Okay. So that's more than what the market is valued today.
I think when the company is as large as India, that P has a different meaning.
Okay. So you saw $50 to $100 billion. You said we need to raise that. The caution was we need to raise that in the next 3 to 4 years. Otherwise, we miss the bus. You also said we'll have to think out of the box. You give us some ideas. How do you think out of the box? But just elaborate on how can India think out of the box?
So take, say for example, when it came to divestment, we have had 3 ideas. And we have seen the way divestment happens. That typically, if you are a listed company, the stock goes down. I cannot discuss specific ideas, but I'm just giving you the problem areas. That is typically we see price slide down dramatically. Or the government has had to resort to intercompany holdings like IOC, ONGC, etc. Or we have seen large dividends out. Can we think out of the box? I talked about railways and ports and so on. And have we attempted that can we, say for example, typically in an infrastructure company or a private company, you have a situation where you sell an existing business to build another one. Has the government done anything like this? Can we do something like this? We have huge assets that probably could be privatized. So I think it may not be appropriate for a public forum to discuss more specifically. Sure. But so both in terms of divestment, in terms of bonds, in terms of engaging with the sovereigns on the other side, because I think our engagement in G20 or now on the global level is of a very different order now, where we are not just we don't have to go out with a begging bowl. Can I make more complex deals? So I think the victory we have had at the WTO, we have been seen both as a principal player and as a facilitator without giving our quarter, I think has raised our respect. The fact that Mr. Obama is coming here has raised our respect. So I think this whole premium enhancement by the man of the moment is being happening.
Okay.
And I think the financing has to follow. If the financing doesn't follow, then maybe we'll miss them.
Okay. Interesting. You said while the rest of the world always says get out of just take your money and let others do everything. You said the government should, you give an example, sell some business to us to start some new businesses. So what, when you say business, you obviously mean areas. What areas should you want the government in where it's not today?
No, I think you see improving the human stock, right? So I think safety, health, skills. And when I say health, I'm talking about sanitation and so on. And providing the facilitation for building infrastructure rather than building it all oneself. I think those are the prime areas where we need to use those funds.
Okay. You've got great faith, Mr. Modi. You said governance by deadline, governance by online, and governance that is in nation before mind. Those are the only 3. You need those 3. It's not easy. Even for one man as popular as Mr. Modi, that means you've got to break through vested interests of, as you know, tremendous order. Has the mood in the nation changed that the nation will back him to do that?
You see, sometimes the way to handle a congestion is to bypass it. And so if you've seen Mr. Modi, he consistently has developed a sloganeering, not for the sake of it, but as a strategy, where he said development is my only agenda. And can I make these people, instead of engaging with them in their rules, in their arena, can I change the battleground? Can I let their imagination move from their day-to-day tasks to something else where there is no convention, there is no precedent, there is no law, and you have to rewrite the law, etc. And it is possible. So I cannot get into specifics, but I've seen some of this. Say, for example, the history of Electricity Act in 2003. When the Electricity Act was passed, it changed so many things. It was not only probably the largest financial closure, because NTPC has a large outstanding, states had outstanding. How in one go, large amount of debts were settled and a future force was created. And if you talk about open access, you talk about all these solutions that people have been struggling for, they completely are ready to engage at a different level. So you have to deal with things in a very more imaginative manner, and I think we have enough precedents, more will be done.
So you set out that yes, we can grow, if we do the following things, we can grow. So let's assume we do it. and we therefore enter into what many in the room think we will enter into, a multi-year bull run. You also said investors, we need a lot of investment. I know you're not only talking about investment in the stock markets, but let me just come back. We are woefully underinvested in the stock market. Indians as a class are woefully underinvested in the stock market. So there are a lot of people out there who, if they want to secure their financial future, it's time they got into these markets. How should they go about it?
As I said that, we have to create an environment for new businesses. It is the new businesses that create massive amount of wealth, not established companies. So we need a lot of them. So whether through IPOs, through private equity, through funds who are much larger participants. Like the government has announced a 10,000 crore fund for startups. We haven't heard any meaningful follow-up. One follow-up I heard was that the banks will give their surplus funds to SIDBI, who will be the anchor investor, and maybe have their difficulties. It speaks volumes of the intent of the government. But I think we all collectively need to put the pressure on the government, give them feedback. That the government is ready to receive the feedback, that we need to, this 10,000 crores has to become 100,000, or ideally, why should the government be doing this? We don't want the government in enterprise primarily. Why can't society find methods? Why can't we as opinion makers create a facility where this amount is 100,000 and we really become large angel investors in many businesses? And that's how we spawn a lot of new enterprises, and they go public, and that's how people will come. So it is the lack of IPOs and whatever happened. See, one other feature of the startups is, typical startup is, that they beat rent seeking. I think we went down seriously by the rent seeking, I guess. So we need to create a counter for the rent seeking also. So multiple things that I think without that, new class of companies, new class of investments, people will again go back because the market is too expensive. Either they make mistake, create a crash, or they go to alternative methods.
Okay, so back to the government on helping create that new class of companies. Absolutely. And getting that this thing back. A question that's been we've been debating through the day, and it's not a 15-year-long question, but has the commodity super cycle really ended in your opinion?
I mean, I believe in the conductive cycle, that these cycles is very difficult to say where they begin, where they end. But I think for the time being, given how liquidity was being created, how liquidity was being managed, and the power of the powers that be, I think money was a large part of the commodity cycle. I think that money has indeed moved in. So I don't see things falling in one fell swoop, but I do see that the great vision that we had only 3 years ago, that nothing will be available, I think clearly has gone.
Okay. Bhansali, I've run out of time. I think it's time I got Ekta in here. Ekta, you want to take the mic around?
Yes, absolutely. We have some audience questions and many hands coming up already. The person in the pink shirt, go ahead.
Mr. Bhansali, good evening. Thank you for your response. My name is Srinivas. I am an ordinary retail investor. I am of the firm believes that 100% of India and 100% of Indians believe in home. But at the same time, there is a substantial number of Indians which also believe in the two-level word called as peace. And the two-level word is aided with fixed fee breakers in the form of Rajya Sabha bills being passed on the ground. So do you see that this idealistic statements that are coming out of the Prime Minister's repertoire can be matched on the ground by seeing the bills getting straight through, so that we can really believe that hope does indeed happen?
I couldn't hear fully well because some
okay.
But he's talking about we have obstacles like Rajya Sabha.
Yeah, no, he says if certain bills are passed, we will get to this thing. So how hopeful are you, let's correct if I'm wrong, how hopeful are you of these crucial bills that are holding up?
I have no idea, my friend, really. But I know one thing, that when you see sincere attempt being blocked by difficulties that we all understand that yes, this indeed is a difficulty and the person at the helm has no solution to it, and the solution can wait, or solution probably will come over time, I think we all learn to accept it. And therefore, we have seen insurance bill for that matter, right? It has come up many times and, it has just faded out. So some of these things will fade out. But as long as the man at the hem continues to do whatever the person can, I think our faith will continue to rise. And then we must take a call that some of the big things that are necessary will not happen. And I have said more than once that you can't really take these things for granted. You must play day to day.
Okay. Well, we have time for one more question, and the gentleman in the black shirt.
Last further, as an investment banker, if on this trading system we already following, anything in the fund flows strategically comes in India, as for the last 6 months for everything. So, down the line, 2 years, what do you expect, what will be the rupee compared to dollar?
As I said, that I find forecasting too complex and because it's all relative word. I mean, for me to say, talk about rupee, I must know the dollar very well, which I don't, unfortunately. And when this government came to power, we thought rupee will reach 52 because I was at one of the boardrooms and that's what I heard. And the reality is something very different. But the forecast that Indian businesses are likely to do better, that Indian government is going to do better, etc., all those forecasts came right. So there is something that you can see more clearly than the rest. So if you ask me that do I see better prospects for India and the companies in India and businesses in India, I definitely do, despite the roadblocks and etc. mentioned by someone else. So that's how I would like to see it. Keep it simple.
Yes, Ekta.
Senthil, back to you.
All right, okay. I think I got a wind-up call from my producer. Mr. Bhansali, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure
Pleasure having you. Thank you.